the information session on achieving your CPA designation. My name is Michael Levy. I'm a co-director of the Paths course. I'll be doing a portion of this evening's presentation. My partner, Ira Walfish, will be doing the second portion of the presentation. Let me begin by explaining what I'd like to do over the course of this presentation. We'll start off with a session purpose, which will be very brief. Then what I'd like to do is give you a bird's eye view of the CPA program. In one slide, just an overall picture of what the program entails. I'd then like to look more closely at three specific components of the CPA program, namely Capstone 1, Capstone 2, and the final exam that everybody writes to get their CPA, known as a CP, the common final exam. I'd then like to take a look at a decision tree. There's more than one path for achieving your CPA designation that's available, in particular to Ontario students, and I'd like to discuss that. I'd like to talk briefly about how to choose the appropriate path. Then what I'd like to do is talk about the module exam blueprints so you get a good idea of what each of the exams entails. The blueprints set out in a fair amount of detail what the exams cover. We'll then move on to the timing of the module exams, which many of you will be writing. And finally, we'll talk about how to prepare for the exams and also how to decide when you're ready to write. In part two of the session, I'd like to talk about, or actually my partner, Ira Walfish, will talk about who is Paths. We'll tell you a little bit about ourselves. And more importantly, we'll talk about what we have to offer to you to help you get through the exams. We have courses, we have resources, we have a lot available that will help you smoothly get through these exams. And then our last slide just provides registration information in case anybody's interested in joining our course or obtaining any resources. So why don't we get started with the session purpose? The purpose of this session is to acquaint you with the exams that you're going to be writing to achieve your CPA designation and to discuss what is involved in preparing for these exams. With that knowledge, you should be in a good position to make an informed decision as to how to attack the exams and when to attack the exams. Obviously, the more you know about the exams, the better a position you are to make a good, well-informed decision. We'll also try to acquaint you with a past program that we've developed to help you successfully complete the CPA program. I'm hoping that once you have more knowledge, it'll help alleviate some of the stress. I know personally that the greatest tension or stress is usually felt when you don't know where to start. You don't fully understand what you're up against and you don't know where to start. By the end of this session, hopefully you'll have a better understanding of what's involved in obtaining your CPA designation, which hopefully should relieve a lot of tension. I mentioned that the first thing I'd like to do in this session is a bird's eye view of the overall CPA program. And again, please feel free to ask any questions as I go along. This one slide, which some of you may have seen, this is actually from CPA Canada, really maps out in one page the basic aspects of the program. Let me just review this with you very briefly, and then we'll talk in more detail. Typically, for most students, when they graduate university, they first have to do two core modules, Core 1 and Core 2. Core 1 focuses primarily on financial accounting, and then at the end of the module, you would then write an exam. Core 2 focuses primarily on management accounting, and at the end of the module, you would write an exam. Now, I will show you the blueprint for both Core 1 and Core 2. There are other competencies tested on each of these exams, but the primary focus of Core 1 is financial accounting. The primary focus of Core 2 is management accounting. You would then go on and do two electives. Now, there are four areas where you can do electives: assurance, performance management, tax, and finance. You'd only have to choose one out of these two, so you would only do two modules in any of 2 out of 4 of these subjects. And again, similar to the case of core, you go through a module for a number of weeks, and then at the end of the module, you would write an exam. Once you've been through all of these modules, you would then typically move on to Capstone 1. We'll look at Capstone 1 in more detail in a few minutes, but for now, let us say that Capstone 1 is effectively a group project where you'll work on a major business case. It's high-level type business decisions you're making, and you'll be preparing a report as a group and presenting it to a mock executive or a mock board. Capstone 2 is basically a module which focuses primarily on writing practice cases for the CPA. And then finally, the last step is to write the CPA, to write the common final exam, hence CFE. That, in a nutshell, is the program that students go through. Now, the education program normally takes 2 years from start to finish. The program can, however, be completed in 1 year, in particular if students take Module 1 and 2 simultaneously. However, in order to take the 2 modules simultaneously, if you want to get through this more quickly, you'd have to be a pretty good student. You'd have to have a GPA of at least 75%. Given the challenge of doing both simultaneously, they want to make sure you're a strong student before you attempt that. Now, there are also what we call challenge exams. Challenge exams mean the following. Instead of going through a particular module, you simply write the final exam. There are challenge exams available for Core 1 and Core 2, as well as for the tax and assurance electives. So for Core 1 and Core 2, there are exams that you can basically write without taking the modules. Now, at the end of the day, if you want to do the other 2 electives, finance and or performance management, there is no challenge exam. You have to do the module. Now, the bad news, unfortunately, is that the challenge exams are being phased out. They're only available until the winter of 2019. So there'll be a set of challenge exams in December and another set in March. So if you're going to be graduating in April or May of 2019 or later, these challenge exams will not be an option. Those of you who are already in the system, you still have a chance to write challenge exams for the December offerings, for the December exams, as well as for the March exams. So in theory, if somebody wanted to write 2 challenge exams in December and another 2 in March, they could avoid the modules. After March, you will have to actually complete the module before you do the exam. After passing the challenge exams or going through the modules, you would then go on to the Capstone integrative modules, Capstone 1 and Capstone 2. Keep in mind, guys, the challenge exam is the exact same exam that people who take the modules write. So whether you go through the modules or you do the challenge exams, either way you end up after that doing Capstone 1 and Capstone 2. Some of you or many of you may be aware that many universities offer accredited programs in place of the modules or capstones. Generally, these accredited programs usually would exempt you from Core 1 and Core 2, as well as the elective modules. In some instances, say for example, it's a master's program, you may also be exempted from the capstones and be able to go right through to the CPA. In many other instances, you'll still have to do Capstone 1 and Capstone 2. Precisely which modules you're exempt from would depend on the university. There is information on the CPA Canada website with regard to the various universities that are accredited. And again, you would have to look at each university individually to determine what you would be exempted from by taking an accredited program. The final step is to write the 2019 CPA. Again, only students for those who are going through the challenge exams or modules, you'd have to be finished your exams by March 2019. So you'd have to be through Core 1, Core 2, as well as the electives by the end of March 2019 in order to write your CPA in September 2019. Those of you who are just at the beginning of the process and will not be finished with the challenge exams or modules prior to March of 2019 would be writing in 2020. In 2020, there will be 2 CPs, one in May and one in September. However, for 2019, there's only 1 CP in September. Before I move on, are there any questions? Are there any questions before I continue? Okay, if there are no questions, we'll then continue. Let's start off now by taking a look at Capstone 1, Capstone 2, and the CPA. As I mentioned before, most students do go through the capstones. Even students that go to accredited programs often still have to complete the capstones. So let me just give you an overview of Capstone 1, Capstone 2, and then the CP itself. As I mentioned earlier, the main focus of Capstone 1 is a big business case, which students work on as part of a group. Capstone 1 also prepares candidates for the CP, particularly for day 1. The CP, as we'll see later, has 3 days to it. And you write one big 4-hour case on day 1, which builds on the case that you worked on during the Capstone 1 module. Now, the key aspects of the Capstone 1 module are as follows. At the end of the module, you need to come out with a significant written report that's intended to simulate the report that one would prepare for a board of directors or a team of senior executives. You also have to do an oral presentation, again, to a mock board or team of executives. And not only that, there's also structured time where this mock board or team of executives can ask you all sorts of questions which you need to answer, where we're really trying to simulate a question period from a board or team of senior executives. The way that Capstone 1 works is you typically start with a 2-day weekend workshop that will provide an opportunity for team members to meet each other, develop team agreements, practice their presentation skills, because remember at the end you're doing a big presentation, quite a formal presentation, and the team would develop an action plan for completing the learning activities that are required for Capstone 1. It's quite time consuming, so make sure before you take this module that you have at least 10 to 15 hours to spare, because although it's not terribly difficult and the vast majority of students will pass Capstone 1, it is not intended to weed people out. Most of the weeding out takes place during Core 1, Core 2, and the elective modules. By Capstone 1, there's no desire to weed people out. So as long as you do the work you're told to do, you should very easily get through it. However, it will require some commitment. My students tell me you could take an easy 10 to 15 hours a week of work. At the end of the day, you submit nothing alone. You submit the report as a group and you make your presentation as a group. Pass rate isn't disclosed, but anecdotally, I think I can say it's very, very high. It's possible to fail as a group if you really don't do what they tell you to do. In theory, an individual student could also fail. If the group determines that a particular student didn't pull his or her weight, that student could fail. But again, I wouldn't worry very much about failing. In all the years I've been teaching for the CP, I don't know if I've ever run into anybody who failed Capstone 1. So it's not a big issue passing, provided you're willing to make the time commitment. Capstone 2 has 3 primary objectives. So Capstone 1 you would typically go to from mid-May until July, and then from mid-July until fairly close to the CP, you'd be working on Capstone 2. Now, Capstone 2 has 3 primary objectives. Number 1, continue the development of the candidate's enabling competencies. So these would be the soft skills you need to write your cases effectively. Number 2, prepare candidates for the 3 days of the CP. We'll take a look in more detail at the CP in a little while, but the CP is 3 days. And then finally, continue the development of the candidate's integration of technical competency areas. During Capstone 2, you'll be writing lots of practice cases that will give you an opportunity to integrate your technical skills into the cases, to basically apply your technical in-case scenarios. There's no examination at the end of Capstone 2, so as long as you submit the cases, you will pass Capstone 2. It doesn't matter if you bomb the cases, as long as you submit them. So again, Capstone 2 is not intended to weed people out. Similar to the case of Capstone 1, we start with a 2-day weekend workshop. Typically, you would write a practice multi-case. By multi-case, I mean a relatively short case, usually 70, 80, or 90 minutes. You'd usually write that case before the workshop, and then you would write a number of cases over the course of about 7 weeks. During the workshop that takes place at the beginning of the module, you'll learn how to debrief your response, how to analyze a response, etc. Basically, they'll try to provide you with some case writing skills. And you do have an opportunity to write practice cases. Not 100% of them are marked. Many are marked. Some of them you would have to mark yourself. Cases are debriefed through online webinars. Before I look at the CP, does anybody have any questions with regard to Capstone 2? Any questions? Okay, so if nobody has any questions, we'll then move on to the description of the CP. The CP is 3 days long. Day one, I mentioned earlier, you're writing a 4-hour case, and it's based on that same case you worked on as a group during Capstone 1. During Capstone 1, you would have done a high-level strategy type case as part of a group that related to a particular company. When you get to day one of your CFE, you'll be dealing with this company. It may be a few years later, and now the company is facing new challenges, and you may need to deal with those challenges in writing up day one. So day one of the CFE is a big case that builds on the case that you did in Capstone 1. Day two is what they call the roll comp, and I'll explain that in just a few minutes. The roll comp is a very lengthy comp in which you will play different roles depending on the competency you chose. And whereas the day one comp is only 4 hours, the day two comp is 5 hours. On day three, you would typically be writing 3 shorter cases. Again, it'll add up to 4 hours. And again, cases at least typically would vary between 70 and 90 minutes, but all 3 cases together would add up to 240 minutes. All 3 cases together would add up to 4 hours. The CFE covers the same 6 competencies that are covered in the core modules. I don't know how many of you have done core modules yet, but these are the different competencies that come up in the core modules. You'll see that certain of these competencies are stressed in core 1, others in core 2, and then others in the elective modules. When you see the blueprints, you'll see which competencies are prominent in each of the different modules. Now, here is where it gets a little bit complicated, so I'd suggest you listen very carefully. In order to pass the CP, you're required to achieve depth in 2 areas on the CP, 2 competencies, and for the other 4 competencies, it is sufficient to achieve breadth. So you need to have a very strong knowledge and the ability to do very in-depth analysis in 2 areas. The other 4, a lower level would be required. Now, if you are the sort of person who wants to potentially, or is at least considering, entering a public accounting career, or pursuing, maybe a better way to put it is pursuing a public accounting career, and you therefore want your public accountant's license, it's prescribed which depth areas you need to choose. You need to demonstrate depth in assurance, so you need to be very strong in assurance and be able to deal with all the complexities associated with assurance, and you need to achieve depth in financial reporting. And I guess it stands to reason. If you're going to be pursuing a career in public accounting and you're going to be doing external audit, then we all know the foundation of external audit is really assurance and financial reporting. If you don't necessarily think you're going to want to pursue a career in external audit, then you can get depth in either financial reporting or management accounting. Either is fine, it doesn't matter. And then you need to get depth in one of the following 4 competencies, either assurance, taxation, performance management, or finance. So as long as you don't care about the public accountant's license, as long as you don't necessarily want to consider an external audit career, as long as you get depth in either financial reporting or management accounting, as well as one of these other 4 competencies, you would be perfectly fine. Now, in case anybody's wondering, what if I decide now I don't think I want to pursue a career in public accounting? So I therefore decide that I'm not going to pursue assurance as a depth area, or I get depth in management accounting rather than financial accounting. And then later on, you never know where life takes you. And somehow or other, over a number of years, you find yourself desiring to do external audit. You wouldn't have to do your CP again because you've passed your CP, you are a CPA. You would just have to write a bridge exam called the PDPA exam. So at the end of the world, you wouldn't have to start from scratch if you changed your mind. Now, before you go into your CP, you don't have to decide whether your depth area is financial accounting or management accounting. Everybody will have to address the same financial reporting and the same management accounting requirements on the CP. So everybody will have to address financial reporting, everybody will have to address management accounting, and at the end of the day, as long as when you address these requirements, you get depth in at least one of these two, you're fine. However, when it comes to the second depth area, which is either assurance, tax, performance management, or finance, when it comes to the second depth area, that you would choose before the CP, because the choice of assurance versus tax versus performance management versus finance determines the nature of the role that you're going to play on what we call the role or elective comp. Role and elective comp mean the same thing. I mentioned that on day 2, you write the elective/role comp. On this comp, what you're going to be required to do will depend on the depth area you've chosen. So not everybody will be addressing the same requirements. Say, for example, I've decided to choose assurance as my depth area. If I choose assurance as my depth area, most of the requirements on day 2, when I write my comp case is one big 5-hour case. When I write this big 5-hour case, if I've chosen assurance as my depth area, most of the requirements I deal with will be in assurance. If I chose performance management as my depth area, most of my requirements will be in performance management. And the same would be true for taxation and finance. The way that the role comp works is there will typically be a required in financial and or management accounting, which everybody needs to address. And then the remaining requirements would then be in your depth area. So the maximum number of competencies that you're going to have to address on day 2 of the CP will really be 3 competencies: your depth area plus management and or financial accounting. If they test both management and financial accounting, then including your depth area, you'll be dealing with 3 competencies. If they only choose management or financial accounting, just one or the other, plus your depth area, then you only have 2 competencies to deal with. This is very, very different from the multis. On day 3, you'll be writing shorter cases, but over the course of day 3, you'll be addressing all 6 competencies. Does anybody have any questions? I imagine that many of you probably do have questions on the exam, and I'd be happy to answer them. Anybody have any questions? Now, I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation that there's more than one path to getting your CPA. The first path, which many students follow, and it's probably the more common path, is what we call the PEP program, where basically you go through the modules that we just discussed. You go through Core 1 and Core 2, and then 2 of the elective modules. These are the prerequisites if you want to pursue this path, and these are the grade requirements. As you can see, the grade requirements are not that extensive if you choose to follow this path. Now, you'll notice that there's different minimum grades for the core courses versus the non-core. In case you're wondering what this means, core courses typically relate to each of the 6 competencies. So assurance, your course in assurance, or your course in tax, these are examples of core courses. Most of your accounting courses would be core courses, except for the intro ones. The non-core ones would be business courses outside of the 6 competencies. So say the course that you take on business law, that would be an example of a non-core course. And again, that's why you can get away with a lower mark. Currency of limitation, I'll explain in just a moment. A second path you can choose to take is a CPA accredited path, which, as I mentioned earlier, entails attending an accredited university. If you attend an accredited university, as we said earlier, you can typically be exempt from doing Core 1, Core 2, as well as the electives. And in some situations, but not most situations, you may be exempt from Capstone 1 or Capstone 2 or both. Usually, though, I find with many universities, it would just be Core 1, Core 2, and the modules. This is a decision you're going to have to make, and I'll talk more about the decision in just a few minutes. Now, you saw at the bottom of this path right here, the CPA path, you can see that it talks about currency of education limits apply. This should not be relevant to many people. I doubt it would be relevant to almost anybody watching this presentation. The currency of limitation limits means that candidates should have completed at least one applicable course in each of the CPA competency areas within the last 10 years of application for admission to the CPA PEP. So what we're dealing with here is if you have a mature student who finished school 20 years ago, there could be an issue. That's really what we're talking about here. However, even in that type of situation, exemptions may be available for candidates with significant work experience. If you're in a situation where you finished your studies a long time ago, you may need to confer with CPA Ontario or whatever your provincial institute is. For further information regarding prerequisites for the CPA path, I just gave you a very brief summary on this slide, but if you want all of the detail, I've given you the URL you can go to, which provides a great deal more detail on the prerequisites. It also shows very clearly, if you go to this website, it'll show you very clearly what are all the core courses versus non-core courses. I just explained in general terms what they mean. Now, the prerequisites for the diploma programs will obviously depend on the particular university. Different universities will have different cutoffs in terms of marks and prerequisites for entering their programs. Now, I mentioned before that it's a pretty big decision to decide which path you're going to take when you do your exams. I'm sorry, which path you're going to take to get to the CP. No matter whether I choose the CPA path or the CPA accredited path, at the end of the day, I still have to write my CP. Everybody has to write their CP. The question is, which path do you take to get to the CP? I give this a lot of thought, and I think that, quite honestly, there are a number of advantages to doing PEP over a diploma accredited program. Number one, PEP tends to be less costly. When I say PEP, I mean doing Core 1, Core 2, and the electives. The cost of the different modules changes. Again, please do look at the website for the most up-to-date figures. But basically, the cost of going through the modules is not very high compared with accredited programs. Some of the accredited programs can be many thousands of dollars. So I think in most instances, it's a great deal less expensive to go through PEP. If you still have time to write the challenge exams, if you're going to be able to attack these exams before March, it's even cheaper. The challenge exams, I think, are about $500, and that's it. So accredited programs tend to be the most expensive way to go. So if you don't have a lot of money to spare, that would be an advantage of not doing an accredited program. Now, another drawback of an accredited program is they're generally full-time programs, and they typically would preclude working for a period of time. The nice thing about going through PEP, which is going through the modules, Core 1, Core 2, as well as the electives, is you can do them part-time. Many students, if not most students, will do these modules while they're working. Very difficult to do an accredited program that way. I'm not aware of any that are part-time. If there is one, it would certainly be the exception to the rule. Number three, just from speaking with my students, I find that my students who go through PEP or write the challenge exams, and again, when you do the challenge exams, you're covering the same material as if you went through PEP, they tend to beef up their technical very well because you need to have good technical in order to write these module exams. And if you obtain the necessary technical to write Core 1, to write Core 2, and to write the electives, then you're probably extremely well prepared for the CP. Because keep in mind, the same technical knowledge that you needed to know for the modules is also required for the CP. Just from anecdotal evidence, I find that the diploma programs or the accredited programs, I find that the knowledge provided there is somewhat spotty. Depending on the program you attend, you may have holes in your technical. So I've had students who come to you and they've said, I attended an accredited program I'm now about to write my CFE, and I feel deficient in a particular competency. I feel deficient, for example, in management accounting. That's unlikely to happen if you go through PEP, if you go through the modules, because if you go through the modules, you're pretty much forced to cover the necessary technical as you go through each module so that you've covered up everything you needed to cover by the time you get to the CFE, and you're not going to find yourself with technical gaps. Now, a fourth point, guys, one of the reasons why some students may be hesitant to do the modules and instead to do an accredited program might be, if I do an accredited program, I'm exempt typically from doing Core 1, Core 2, and the elective. So some students might be tempted to say it's worth spending many thousands of dollars in order to get exempt from the PEP modules. That would be a very good point if it was terribly difficult to get through these module exams. But just from my experience, and we've been preparing students for the module exams now for many years, ever since the CP started, my experience has been that these exams are extremely passable if you're well prepared. So if these exams were terribly difficult to get through, it would certainly be a worthwhile investment to spend a lot of money to do an accredited program in order to avoid having to write these module exams. But given that it's not terribly difficult to get through these module exams, I don't think there's a huge benefit in being exempted from these exams at the high cost required to do the accredited programs, plus the possible drawback of ending up with holes in your technical. So I think that for most students, if they can do challenge exams, that's great. If they can't, because again, they're doing most of their exams after March 2019, then I would certainly choose the PEP modules over accredited programs. There may be students in unique situations who want to do accredited programs, but overall, I do think that both from a preparation perspective and from a cost perspective, you are better off doing the modules. Does anybody have any thoughts or any questions with regard to doing PEP versus an accredited program? Any questions or thoughts, concerns? I'm very happy to make this interactive. Nobody has any questions? Okay, so we'll move on. Let's now talk about the module exams. I'd like to give you a detailed understanding of what exactly these exams entail. What are you up against when it comes to doing Core 1 and Core 2? What are you up against when it comes to the electives? So let's get started with Core 1 and Core 2. I'll review with you the blueprint that sets out what is examined on Core 1 as well as Core 2. And then what I'd like to do is take a look at the electives. And again, please ask any questions as I go along. The Core 1 and Core 2 exams focus primarily on objective format questions, which is basically multiple choice. 75% of the exam is comprised of these objective format questions. So this is primarily a multiple choice exam. There is, however, a case, one 60-minute case, and that one 60-minute case makes up the remaining 25% of the exam. So Core 1 and Core 2 does not focus primarily on case writing. The major focus is short answer, multiple choice type questions. Now, we're talking about a 4-hour exam. So you'd be spending 3 hours on the multiple choice, objective format, and the other hour on the case. I should mention that you would be given the full exam at the very beginning. So you can decide how to allocate your time. In theory, if you wanted to spend more than 75% of your time on the objective format questions and less than 25% on the case, or vice versa, there's nothing to prevent you from doing so. But we would strongly recommend that you allocate your time as advised, that you not spend more than 3 hours on the case and make sure to leave over the last hour or 1 hour for the case. Because if you overspend time on the multiple choice, unlikely you'll have enough time to do the case. As long as you've got 60 minutes, that should be ample time to get through the case successfully. But if you start overspending time on the objective format portion of the exam, that will really eat into the time you need for the case, and you may have trouble getting finished. Now, Let's talk for a moment about Core 1 versus Core 2. As I mentioned when I gave you the bird's eye overview, Core 1, the main focus is on financial reporting. So for the objective format portion of the exam, which is the bulk of the exam, 50 to 70% of the marks will be in financial reporting. So you can see that at least half, if not a great deal more than half of the exam for the objective format portion will focus on financial reporting. The second biggest focus will be audit and assurance. That's 10 to 30%. There will be a small amount of finance, 5 to 10%. And then there is a good chunk on taxation. It's not huge, but it's significant enough that you should have some familiarity. 10 to 20% of the exam is taxation. Core 2, as I mentioned when we were looking at the bird's eye view of the overall CPA system, focuses on management accounting. You can notice that management accounting is 50 to 70% of the Core 2 exam. Another big chunk of the Core 2 exam is strategy and governance. So if you look at the total of strategy and governance and management accounting, that makes up the bulk of the objective format portion of the Core 2 exam. There could potentially be a tiny bit of financial reporting, but there may be none at all because it gets anywhere from 0 to 10%. And then the second biggest chunk after strategy and governance and management accounting would be finance. That would be 15 to 20%. So again, you'd want to have a good basis in finance before you go into that exam, given that 15 to 20%, is a significant amount. Now, what we just looked at was the 75% of the exam that is made up of objective format questions. Now let's take a look at the case portion of the Core 1 and Core 2 exams. For the Core 1 exam, the cases will assess competencies mainly in financial reporting. So the 60-minute case that you write in Core 1 will revolve primarily around financial accounting, but it'll also integrate one or two other competencies. So quite likely it'll integrate some assurance, and then it might also integrate a third competency. But it has to integrate at least one additional competency beyond financial reporting. The Core 2 case, again, as you can probably guess, will focus mainly on management accounting, but once again, it would integrate one or two other competencies. Very, very high probability that it would integrate strategy and governance, because that, again, is the second most important competency for Core 2. And then it could also have a third competency. For example, you may have some finance. Now, you will have access to reference material during the exam. The bottom line is through a computer program, through Secure Exam that is provided to all of you, you will have on your computer, remember you're writing the exam on your laptop, through a particular program that CPA Canada provides to all students across Canada, you will have your CPA handbook electronically, you'll have your Income Tax Act electronically, and you will also be given a reference table at the back of Core 1 and Core 2 that will give you a lot of the common ratios, so you won't have to learn all of the financial ratios by heart. You'll also be given some tax information, including the tax shield formula and various other relevant tax information, like the rules for different, the percentages for different CCA groups, CCA classes, etc. Here is a point that's worth highlighting. The standards and regulations that are examinable are those that are in effect as at December 31st of the prior year. So if any of you are writing in 2019, it would be December 31st of 2018. If you're writing in 2020, we're talking here about being responsible for everything everything that's in effect at December 31st, 2019. So it's always at the end of the year previous to the year in which you're writing. Now, I just want to point out that when it comes to Secure Exam, which is the software you're going to be using to write your exam, the cutoff is November. So if any new handbook release comes out after November 30th, you will not be responsible for it. However, if there is a handbook release that came out before November 30th, but it only took effect in December, that you will be responsible for. Any questions, guys, on the blueprint for Core 1 and Core 2? Any questions on that? Okay, so now let's take a look at the blueprint for the assurance elective. When it comes to the assurance elective, I'd like to focus not on what they're allowed to test, because that's kind of irrelevant, but rather what is in effect right now. Right now, the way you can expect your assurance elective to look is you can expect to see about 15 objective format questions. Typically, it's been 15 questions. And then the remainder of the exam will be your cases. So notice how once you get to the electives, it's the reverse of the core exams. Whereas in the core exams, the main focus is on the objective format questions. 75% of the exam was objective format for Core 1 and Core 2. Once you enter the electives, the objective format portion of the exam is a small part of the exam. In the case of tax, 15 objective format questions. Now, the remainder of the exam would be 2 cases. And as it says over here, you can expect the 2 cases to take up a total of 150 minutes. And the maximum time for any given case would be 90 minutes. So you're going to have 2 cases that will add up to 150 minutes. And that is where you'll be spending most of your time. Now, you'll notice that under the heading of other information, they say that the exam is designed to be completed in only 3 hours, but they've given you 4. So what they're saying here is that you should not expect to be too rushed. When I speak to my students, I don't know if they would all confirm that it's really doable in 3 hours, but I think most would agree that if you use your time efficiently, you should be able to do it in 4 hours. Similar to the case of what I said for the core exams, please do break down your time the way they suggest. Don't go overtime on your objective format questions. Make sure to leave adequate time for the cases. They will indicate for each case how many minutes you should be spending on it, and I would stick to that time limit. So if they tell you that you need 90 minutes for a case, make sure you leave over 90 minutes for the case. Don't play around with the time. You're much more likely to be successful if you stick to the times that you're provided with. Now, when it comes to the 15 objective format questions, you'll notice that they can test 4 different areas. So objective format questions, for the purpose of assurance, do not focus exclusively on assurance. Assurance will obviously be a big part of the questions, 50 to 70% of those 15 questions, but they can also do a fairly heavy amount of testing of financial reporting. That will make up 20 to 40% of the multiple choice questions. Strategy and governance and finance may or may not come up. Even if they do come up, they'll be very minor. So I certainly wouldn't focus very much on strategy and governance or finance for my assurance elective. Now, for the case portion, not surprisingly, the competencies tested will be mainly in assurance, but similar to the core exams, they need to integrate with 1 or 2 other competency areas. What you're going to find as you move into the electives is the cases will become more involved than they were for the core. They'll be longer, and that's why you're given more time to work on them. And again, they should be somewhat integrated, where you're integrating assurance with at least one other competency. Very good probability that at least one of the competencies you'll be integrating with will be financial accounting. But again, a large part of what you'll be dealing with on the exam will be assurance. Are there any questions on the assurance blueprint before we take a look at the taxation elective? Okay, if there are no questions, guys, you'll notice that for the taxation elective, again, you've got 15 objective format questions, so you can start to see a trend here. And once again, the bulk of the exam is the cases. Once again, you've got 2 cases adding up to 150 minutes, and the longest any one of those cases can be is 90 minutes. Once again, you've got 4 hours in total to write the exam, and in theory, at least, you should be able to do it in 3 hours. I'd be rather skeptical about that, particularly when it comes to the taxation elective, given that taxation involves a fair amount of number crunching and can be quite time consuming. So I would take the part about the 3 hours with a grain of salt, but it should be doable in 4 hours. Now, unlike the case of assurance, when it comes to taxation, all 15 of the objective format questions, of the multiple choice questions, will be in taxation. Whereas when it came to assurance, there were potentially 4 competencies they could test on the objective format portion of the exam. When it comes to taxation, the objective format portion of the exam will be exclusively taxation. When it comes to the case, it will be similar to assurance. The case will mainly test one competency, in this case taxation, but similar to the case of assurance, they will also integrate with 1 or 2 additional competencies. Now, when you get to the finance elective, guys, I don't want to repeat myself again. Once again, you've got the 15 objective format questions, the bulk of the emphasis being on case writing. You'll be doing 2 cases, just like in assurance and tax. When it comes to the objective format portion, finance is similar to tax, when you will only be dealing with 1 competency on the 15 objective format questions. All 100% of the questions will be finance. Similar, just like on tax, 100% of the 15 questions are tax. But when it comes to the case, once again, although the main focus will be finance, it will be combined with at least 1 or 2 additional competencies. Finally, if you decided to do the performance management elective, again, similar format to the other elective exams in terms of the 15 objective format questions, the 2 cases, and the 4 hours to get through the exam. However, notice that when it comes to the 15 questions in performance management, similar to the case of assurance, more than 1 competency is examinable. You'll notice that basically the objective format questions will primarily focus on strategy and governance and management accounting. Because if you think about performance management, it's made up primarily of those 2 subjects. So you'll notice the biggest piece is management accounting, 40 to 60%. The second biggest piece, which is still extremely significant, is 30 to 50%. And then they could, in theory, throw in objective format questions on financial reporting and audit or assurance, but they may not, because it can go as low as 0% for financial reporting and audit and assurance. Even if they do throw in the odd question, it would be a very small part of the exam. You certainly would not want to focus at all on financial reporting or audit and assurance when you're preparing for this exam. When it comes to the cases, guys, you'll notice that the combination of strategy and governance plus management accounting will make up at least 50% of the exam, and likely a lot more than 50%. And then in addition to that, you can expect them to also test 1 or 2 other competency areas. But again, you can expect the bulk of the case to focus on strategy and governance and management accounting, since these 2 subjects pretty much comprise performance management. Does anybody have any questions before we move on to the timing of the modules? If nobody has any questions, we'll just take a 1-minute break, and Ira Walfish, my partner, will take over the presentation.
Hi everyone, just want to make sure you guys can hear me. It's Ira Walfish here. Give me a quick yes in the chat box if you can hear me. Are you okay? Am I coming through? Beautiful, thank you very much. Okay, I'm getting a number of you saying yes. Okay, good. Okay, so people, what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue from where Michael left off, and we'll talk about the timing of the modules. So let's have a look. Okay, this has changed a little bit over the years, but basically we're now down to really 4 times that we're writing this thing. So the challenge exams are going to end in March, okay, 27-28. That's going to be the last date for the challenge exams, and then it looks everything is written basically every time. So after March, it'll be July, September, December, and those will be, you'll have modules for each of those, obviously starting about 2 months before. There was a time when they had, like, I don't know, they did weird things, like they didn't have Core 1 or something like that, but basically now it's very simple. They're just running all of them. And they're using also, I should just tell you, they're using the same combinations on each day. So I don't know if Michael mentioned or not, but you know, you can only write, at most you can write is 1 exam per day. So on any 2-day sitting, the most you can write are 2 exams. So one thing you always want to be cognizant of is which ones are coming up on which day, because you can't write, for example, Core 1 and Assurance would be on the same day. So you cannot write Core 1 and Assurance the same sitting. So you just want to be cognizant of what's coming up each time. And the whole idea of this is really, I think you have to work backwards. You have to decide when you want to write the CFE, work backwards to when you want to finish off the modules, and then I would try to give yourself, enough time. So if you're unsuccessful, hopefully that won't happen. But if you're unsuccessful, you don't want to have it that you're leaving 2 exams. I mean, if necessary, I guess you could do this, but if you write 2 exams in March and that's your last chance, and you've already passed 2 of them, if you're unsuccessful in one of those exams, that's going to push you into the following year. That's the, you know what I mean? Like, that's the problem. So it's nicer if you give yourself a little buffer. If you write something in December and then you're unsuccessful, then you can write in March and you can still write the following September for the CFE. Okay, but once you are unsuccessful in March, then you're pushed off a whole other year, because you're going to have to wait, you can't write till July, and you're not allowed to write the CFE that September. Okay. Any questions on that? Is everybody with me? All right. You can look at the schedule. You can look at this after, whatever. If you want to go to the schedule from the website, you can see the schedule here. All right. So basically just a few minutes on, I don't have that much, but just a few minutes on who are we. So, I mean, we've been doing this, obviously, I think we've been doing this longer than anyone out there, really. We've been doing courses since 1989. And over the years, we've offered courses in all of the large firms, as well as many mid-sized firms. We run the program for PwC. So when it says we offer across Canada, so we do PwC across Canada. Michael did very well when he wrote. He actually scored the gold medal when he wrote his exam, which is pretty good. We use sometimes other instructors, but the truth is we don't have that many. Nowadays, it's mainly myself and Michael doing almost all of the teaching. The other people we use have professional experience. And I think the feedback over the years has been good. So what we try and do, obviously, is provide as much assistance as possible for people going through the process. So I guess where we can help is starting with people taking modules. What we have found is that the modules don't do the greatest job in providing a lot of good resources for people writing these exams. The purpose of the modules is not simply to have you pass the exam. Okay, that's the reality. What I mean is, they obviously want you to pass the exam, but they're also trying to train you to become a professional. So not everything you do in the module is going to be useful. They're not running the modules like a prep course. That's the way that we're running our stuff, because really our only concern is that you pass the exam. So it may sound funny when we say the modules don't provide a comprehensive technical review, but that's the reason. They don't look at it, and in fact, if you would say this to them, they probably would be a little offended if you would walk up to them and say something like, so this is like a prep course for me to pass the exam. They don't like it when that's the perception. So what we do is we supplement. So we have extensive technical resources. We get lots of people who purchase our resources because I think they're much more compact and they're much more focused. And we have lots of people that purchase our resources when they're in the modules. And you can buy the resources with or without the videos. And the videos are essentially our courses that we tape. Just like we're recording tonight's session and we'll make it available to everybody. That's what the videos are. So we give people really lots of options. You can buy everything. You can buy for the whole package. You can buy for individual competencies. We let you do really whatever you want, okay, to buy for the technical material, from individual competencies to the whole thing, with or without videos. Stop me, please, if you have any questions as I'm walking through this. We also have cases. and we sell those separately, and you can purchase the cases. I will say, I think the cases are much more useful on the electives than they are for Core 1 and Core 2. We do have people that purchase our cases for Core 1 and Core 2, but truthfully, I don't think you need very good case writing abilities for Core 1 and Core 2. You might want to practice. So people just buy them. We don't charge very much for those cases, and you just get some extra practice. But as Michael probably explained when he was going through the blueprints, where we give more, where I think the cases are more useful, where the case writing has to be a bit of a higher level, is in the elective exams. And you could purchase this, and you can see here, this is where we have it on the website. Basically, it's under the Paths store, and you could just see our technical resources and our case writing resources for people in the modules. Any questions on that? Now, there's a lot of people that are in accredited or diploma programs. So I look at them very similar to the people taking the modules. I mean, nowadays, it's a huge, big hodgepodge of, you know, depending on your program, what you have to do. So I don't know, there's a big variance. What we hear is there's a big variance in the programs. Some programs are not that great when it comes to technical. So we have people that purchase our technical material. Other programs are a little weaker on cases. So we have people that come to us for case writing. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, this slide is really just telling you that we really have all the resources for what, you know, when you're in these programs, the same way when you're in modules. And these programs, a lot of times it depends where they go, like up until what point. Sometimes you would you'd be in an accredited program, and then you would go to Capstone 1 and Capstone 2 from CPA Canada. Other time, the program encompasses Capstone 1, but not Capstone 2. Sometimes it goes Capstone 2 as well, right up to the CFE. Essentially, we're supplementing the program. That's really what we're doing. The problem is, again, people, you have to be careful. Some of these programs are doing they're trying to do multiple things. There's programs out there that are covering, you know, MBA, including, you know, CFE training, basically. Okay, you're trying to cover MBA courses along with CFE. I don't know. I have a feeling, I haven't looked at it in detail. I'm thinking of one particular program, but you got to be careful, because programs like that can obviously have deficiencies when they're trying to cover so much. All right, now we have actual technical courses. These courses start in the winter months, and you can attend these courses live online or actually in class. That's our financial accounting review. Or you can simply buy the material and buy the videos. Management accounting, we have an online course. These are in like March. So management accounting, we have a live online course. Again, if you miss it, you just watch the videos, or you could just purchase the material. And then we have an introduction to case writing. So that's obviously very important, starting in the spring. We purposely do this before Capstone 1. We have a case writing course in the spring to get people into cases. People, the problem is that once you hit Capstone 1, which is the middle of May, you're going to be busy enough on Capstone 1, which I'll talk about in a second, that you're not going to do anything else up until the first week of July. That's a lot of time just on Capstone 1, which means you're doing nothing to help you prepare for case writing for day 2 and day 3. We purposely want you to start writing cases before that. I think it's a little late to start writing cases mid-July. That's the problem. The timing is not great for Capstone 1. That is the whole reason we have this case writing. We don't have tons, but we purposely started before Capstone 1 to get you into a little bit of case writing. And then if you have any free time during the month, you know, once Capstone 1 starts, you know, over, I don't know, almost a 2-month period, about 6-7 weeks until the end of Capstone 1, then you can also write some cases on your own. At least you started the process when it comes to multis for day 3. That's the purpose of this introduction to case writing. Okay. And the technical resources, fine, I've already mentioned that. That's just the link. Okay, any questions? Everyone good? All right, now, our comprehensive course, our main case writing course in the summer includes two things. It includes case writing and it includes techniques. People, this is not technical. The purpose of these technique sessions are to help you move up the levels. The whole trick when you're writing cases here is they rank you in these levels. Are you reaching competent? Are you competent? Are you competent with distinction? So we try and teach techniques, things you can do to help your chances move from reaching competent to competent. That's what we try and do. So we have techniques in various areas. Okay, I'll show you in a second. From a case writing perspective, this is what we're doing for case writing. We start off how to get depth. Okay, fine, we have a technique how to get depth. And then you're writing cases. So I don't know, we have about 5 multis. We have 2 comps. Those are day 2 comps. Okay, we're taking them up. We even have a personal counseling session where you sit down with the marker, either in person or, I don't know, over Skype. It doesn't really matter. And the marker that writes your exam basically goes through with you. And we give you a binder and all the course notes. Okay, so this is really the case writing aspect of our comprehensive course. That's about 5 days. Okay, and marking guide publication, fine. And then we have these technique sessions. So we have a technique session for quants. Quants is big. There's quants left and right in all the questions. How do you do them quickly? How do you do them efficiently? What can you do in your quants to help you move up from reaching to competent? Financial accounting. How do you get depth in financial accounting? How do you get depth in audit? We have audit techniques. Doesn't matter if you're taking, if you're specializing in audit, whatever, if that's your audit role in day 2 or in day 3, we have techniques to help you, move up in audit. And we have a tax session. So again, these are not technical. We don't do these before, during the modules. These are really for case writing. Does anyone have any questions? And this is all taking place in late July and early August when we run our comprehensive course. Now, we try to make it very flexible. So anytime we run a course before the summer, we never run it during the day in case people are working. Anything we do in class in the winter or spring would always be in the evening or on a Sunday. In the summer, for the comprehensive course, we will run it twice. We run it both in class, but in the summer we do it during the day. So people that are working can come during the day. They do the live online. The live online are in the evening. And the truth is you never miss anything anyway, because if you miss a course, we video everything and then you watch the video. And we give you access to the videos as long as you'll need them. If we're offering both like we are in the summer, you can switch between the in-class and the live online. It makes no difference. You can look at the schedules. You can see when the classes are. If you can make it in class, great. We may have an in-class on Sunday. Let's say you're working during the week and you want to go to 1 or 2 in class. You go to the ones on Sundays. Okay, so we try to make it very, very flexible. And you'll have access to the videos as long as you'll need the videos. So some people ask us, why should I take Paths if I'm taking Capstone 2? So people, look, we get this question. We have a number of reasons. Number one, Capstone 2 is fine. You have no choice. You have to do it. And it's good. You get feedback. But the truth is, it's not sufficient. Like, that's the truth. I mean, they give you feedback and it's great, but it's just not enough. You need more feedback. You only write a limited number of exams. We're just giving you more opportunity to write more exams. Plus, you get to meet a marker one-on-one. Okay, which I don't think you get really with Capstone 2. A big part of our course is the case take-ups. We try to show you how to walk through a case. That's a big thing. So, we spend 2.5 hours going over the cases. So our debriefing and our case take-ups are a very important part of the course, not just writing of the case, but watching the debriefing. I don't care if you watch them live or if you watch the videos after. If you miss it live, it doesn't matter. But that is a big part. Number 3, we drive the markers crazy to give you guys a ton of feedback. We try to give you a lot of comments on how you're doing on the cases. Okay, that is a big part. Obviously, they have to mark it, you know, whether or not you got reaching competent, which level did you get, reaching competent, competent, whatever. But the truth is, we try our best to give you as much constructive feedback, okay, from the markers as possible. All the technique sessions are totally different. You won't get anything like that in Capstone 2. That is half of our course. Again, it's not technical. But those techniques, I think, are very important. You know, they have dumbed down this whole exam, okay, from what it used to be. And using these techniques, and again, people, I do want to make one thing clear. When I say these are techniques, they're not templates. What I mean by that is you can't just go into a question and do the same thing every time. That's a template. We don't teach templates. We're against them. I don't think it's good. Techniques are, you have a strategy. When assurance shows up and you apply that strategy, you maneuver the technique based on the case, but it's not hard to do once you understand the basic technique. Okay, that is the purpose of these techniques. So they should be very, very useful when you're writing cases. Now, look, you will be busy if you are working full-time and taking Capstone 2 and doing our course. Capstone 2 is designed for when you work full-time. But I'm not going to tell you you're not going to be busy. Can you do our course along with Capstone 2 as well as working full-time? The answer is yes. The reason is that's why one of the reasons we make it so flexible. We make it very flexible. Again, you can go in class, you can go live online, you can watch the videos. You just have to hand in the exams, you know, in order to get them marked. So the answer is yes, you can do it, but you definitely are busy. But look, that is your busiest time of the year. There's no question in the summer. That's the busiest time. Okay, so people are going to be working evenings. I'm not saying every evening, but people will be working evenings and on the weekends. Obviously, people expect to be doing that. We're talking now, what, 6 weeks before the exam? So the answer is yes, you can do it. We try to make it very flexible. We're very lenient when it comes to handing these cases in. This year, the truth is, I was probably too lenient last year when people were handing in cases, and, you know, like getting them in late and stuff like that. The truth is, we really try and work with you because we understand it's to your advantage to hand in as, you know, write as many cases as you can, and we know it's difficult when you're working. So we try and be as flexible as we can. All right. So people, look, that's a breakdown on our courses. You register online. Obviously, if you have any questions, you can email me. It is like on a first come, first serve basis. Our restrictions really are marking, depending on how many people register for our cases. I have to line up markers. So that's one of the restrictions. Our in-class restriction, even our live online restriction is how many people we have. It's very difficult to do a live online session when you have a huge number of people. You have people asking questions every 5 seconds. The session becomes crazy. So we do have space restrictions, both in class, obviously, with our classroom size, and live online. You don't need to be registered with CPA Ontario or any provincial institute. That really doesn't matter for us. In fact, I always say to people, just make sure, you know, start the course early, because starting early is to your advantage. It doesn't really matter to me if you're registered with the institute or anything. That makes no difference. Our contact information, it's all over the website. We're very accessible. That's one thing we're always doing, is answering questions from students and stuff like that. So again, we do this full time. So we're quite accessible either through email or through phone. All right. Questions? Any questions? All right, so people, look. just to kind of summarize here and finish, and again, please ask any questions. I'm not getting any questions here, which is kind of weird in a study plan session, okay? But maybe we're so thorough, I don't know, that we like answered all the questions, but I don't know. Obviously, what we tried to do here is give you a whole breakdown. Michael went through, you know, the whole kind of study approach and what the exam consists of, and the blueprints, and what kind of you're facing, and then how we try and help along the way. We look at our job really is to make your life easier and to give you as much as you possibly need in order to help you pass this exam. That really is our job along the way. Okay. Any questions, people, before we sign off? Is everybody good? We're going to make this, okay, so we're going to make this available, obviously. Once I close the recording and stuff, we're going to upload it. You'll be able to watch it. If you want to watch some stuff again, by all means, watch it again. And if you have any other questions that you're not thinking of now and you want to ask or email Michael and myself, please do, and we will get back to you. Okay, so let me just turn off the recording. Just give me one sec. Okay, so I hope whoever is watching this recording found this session useful.